Why Carl Jung says being hard to get makes you powerful. When Carl Jung spoke about the deep structures of the psyche, he wasn't just interested in describing human behavior, he was trying to reveal the hidden laws that govern how we relate to ourselves, to others, and to the world. One of his most overlooked insights is the subtle, psychological power of being hard to get. Not in the superficial, manipulative sense you see in dating advice or social media games, but in a much deeper, more existential way. Jung saw that the things we chase often lose value precisely because we chase them. And conversely, the things that withhold themselves mystery, integrity, inner stillness become powerful not because they are loud, but because they are unavailable. In this way, being hard to get isn't a strategy. It's a reflection of psychic wholeness. Now imagine this. You meet someone who doesn't need your validation. They're kind, but not eager. Present, but not desperate for attention. They don't explain themselves. They don't overshare. They're not trying to be liked, yet you find yourself pulled toward them. Why? Jung would say it's because they're not projecting lack. They're not revealing a wound that needs to be filled. Instead, they're radiating something rare, containment, psychological completeness. And that's magnetic. Because in a world that's constantly broadcasting need, someone who doesn't need anything from you feels like freedom.
Click subscribe to this channel to get more topics you love.
We live in a culture obsessed with availability. Everyone's online. Everyone's reachable. Everyone's broadcasting themselves in real time. And yet, the more available we become, the more our presence loses weight. When Jung talked about the self, the deep, unified core of who we are, he described it as something that can't be fully grasped or possessed. It's not something you can hand over to others easily. But when you give yourself away too freely, you fragment. Your energy leaks. You become reactive instead of centered. And people feel that. They may not know how to articulate it, but they sense it. You become just another open tab in a browser of distractions. But when you learn to withhold, not to manipulate, but to protect yourself, you begin to generate gravity. But the kind of gravity that draws people in, not because you're chasing them, but because you're rooted in your own being. Jung believed that real power isn't loud. It's quiet. It's the power of someone who has faced their shadow, integrated their contradictions, and no longer needs to explain who they are. And when you encounter someone like that, you can't help but be intrigued. Because they've done something most people never do, they've become whole. Let's go deeper. Why does chasing push things away? Why does availability often reduce attraction? Jung would point to the archetype of the anima and animus, the inner feminine and masculine energies within all of us. These archetypes long for balance, not chaos. They are not drawn to what is needy, but to what is whole. When you chase, whether it's a person, a dream, or a sense of self, you're signaling imbalance. You're revealing a fracture. And that fracture, if not faced, will repulse what you most desire. Not because you're unworthy, but because your energy is broadcasting lack. Jung once said, "The meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed. But the quality of that transformation depends entirely on what each person brings to the exchange. If you bring emptiness, you create fusion without structure. If you bring wholeness, you create polarity. That's what makes someone powerful, not their words, not their status, but their psychic coherence. Their ability to hold their own tension without needing someone else to resolve it. So what does it really mean to be hard to get in a Jungian sense? It means you've stopped leaking your energy into the world for approval. You've reclaimed your projections. You've retrieved the parts of yourself you once outsourced to lovers, friends, mentors, even enemies. You're no longer looking for someone to complete you because you've turned inward and met the self. And that makes you rare. Not rare in a flashy, performative way, but rare in the way gold is rare, dense, valuable, not easily dissolved. Ask yourself, where are you too available? Where are you giving yourself away in the hope of being seen, wanted, or chosen? Where are you chasing instead of standing still and becoming the kind of person who is chosen without needing to beg? These are not casual questions. They are soul-level questions. Because the answer will reveal where your power is leaking and where it can be reclaimed. In the next part, we're going to explore the shadow side of being too available. We'll look at how over-explaining, oversharing, and over-giving are often unconscious attempts to solve deep-rooted insecurities. And we'll examine how Jung believed that reclaiming your mystery is not just attractive, it's essential for individuation, the process of becoming your truest self. The power of mystery. Why too much availability destroys your depth. There is something sacred about what is unknown. Mystery isn't just a romantic or poetic idea, it's a psychological force. Carl Jung understood that mystery, when preserved, invites projection, fascination, and reflection. It's not about hiding, it's about depth. And in a world where we are constantly invited to explain ourselves, to be transparent, to be accessible at all times, we lose something vital when we give too much. We lose the quiet power of enigma. We flatten the soul into something consumable. And when we do that, we stop being magnetic. We become noise. Think about the people who hold your attention the most, the ones you can't quite figure out. The ones who don't reveal everything about themselves right away. There's a pull to them, not because they're playing games, but because they contain themselves. They don't rush to explain. They don't overexpose. They allow you to wonder. And in that wondering, something profound happens. You begin to invest psychic energy. You project, you imagine, your curiosity awakens. That's not manipulation. That's the natural response to mystery. Jung would say that mystery activates the unconscious. It opens a space inside us that's usually dormant. And in that space, attraction, respect, and even reverence can grow. But when you're too available, when you're always explaining, validating, showing every thought and feeling, you strip yourself of that depth. You become entirely visible, yes, but also entirely predictable. There's no room for projection, no space for curiosity. You become flattened, like a character in a book whose every motive is spelled out on page 1. There's no tension, no growth, no transformation. And without transformation, there is no lasting connection. Because the deepest relationships, romantic, platonic, even professional, are built not just on familiarity, but on fascination. Jung would argue that the oversharing impulse comes from a deep fear of not being seen. We've confused visibility with intimacy. But they're not the same. Visibility is about exposure. Intimacy is about resonance. You can be fully visible and still feel unseen. You can share your entire life online and still feel alone. Because what people truly connect to isn't your information, it's your essence. And your essence can only be felt when there is space, when there is silence, when there is mystery. This is why Jung placed such a high value on inner containment. He believed that the psyche needs boundaries not just to protect itself from others, but to preserve its own energy. When you leak your inner world constantly, you weaken your psychic structure. You start to need feedback to feel real. You become dependent on reaction, and in that dependency, you lose authority over yourself. You become shaped by the gaze of others instead of being shaped by the self. So what does this mean practically? It means you must learn to hold back, not in fear, but in strength. You don't need to share every thought you have. You don't need to explain your feelings to everyone. You don't need to be accessible to every message, every call, every demand. Boundaries are not barriers, they are containers. They hold your energy. They preserve your mystery. They allow you to build a life with depth instead of just exposure. Ask yourself, what would it look like to become a little more mysterious, not for attention, but for integrity? Where in your life are you over-explaining, hoping to be understood instead of resting in the confidence that you are already whole? Where are you reacting out of fear instead of responding from presence? These are the hidden places where power is lost, but they are also the exact places where power can be reclaimed. In the next part, we'll go even deeper. We'll explore the connection between withholding and individuation, how Jung believed that becoming truly yourself requires a strategic withdrawal from the collective. You'll learn why being hard to get isn't just a relational tactic, it's a spiritual necessity if you want to become someone others respect, desire, and cannot easily define. Sacred withdrawal. Pile. How stepping back creates soul-level influence. Carl Jung believed that the path to becoming a true individual, what he called individuation, required a kind of sacred withdrawal from the world. Frantic. Prone. Wokul. Resavelka. Not a permanent detachment, not isolation or antisocial rejection, but a deliberate stepping back from collective noise, external validation, and social conformity. This withdrawal is not weakness, it's not aloofness. It's a necessity for becoming someone who doesn't merely reflect the world but shapes it. And in that sacred withdrawal, something astonishing happens. You begin to exert influence not through effort, but through presence. You become what others feel but cannot name. You become a gravitational force. Most people live in a reactive state. They are constantly responding to stimuli, notifications, opinions, expectations, fears. Their identity is formed not from within, but from without. Jung warned that the danger of the unexamined life is that we become mere masks, personas playing roles, saying what's acceptable, chasing what's popular. And the more we live that way, the more we dissolve into the collective unconscious. We become they instead of I. We become available to everyone, and known by no one, not even ourselves. True power, Jung taught, requires differentiation. You must step back not to escape, but to see, to hear the voice beneath the noise, to find the self beneath the persona. This is where sacred withdrawal becomes essential. It's not a performance, it's a practice. It's the decision to not always answer, and to not always explain, to not always be seen. It's the refusal to let the world own your attention. And in that refusal, you begin to gather something rare in modern life, psychic density. You stop being scattered, you stop being reactive. You build an inner center, and that center becomes magnetic. What's fascinating is how this withdrawal makes you more influential, not less. Because people are drawn to what they don't fully understand. They respect what doesn't seek their approval. They are captivated by what doesn't perform for them. When you stop trying to be visible, you begin to emanate something deeper, authenticity. And that authenticity is what truly influences others, not your outreach, not your content, not your attempts to be liked. It's your being itself. Think about the wisest people you've encountered. The ones who speak with silence before they speak with words. The ones who don't rush to fix everything, who don't try to dominate conversations, who seem to carry a world inside them. What makes them powerful isn't just what they say, it's the space they hold. They've withdrawn from the need to prove, and in doing so, they've become undeniable. Jung would say they've touched the self. And because they've touched it, they no longer need to broadcast themselves. They radiate themselves. So here's the challenge. Can you withdraw from the places that drain you, not because you're running away, but because you're returning to yourself? Can you stop answering every call for attention, every pull for opinion, and instead ask, what part of me am I giving away, and why? Can you become less available so that your presence becomes more meaningful? The less you react, the more intentional you become. And the more intentional you become, the more powerful your influence will be because it's coming from essence, not ego. Sacred withdrawal is not absence, it's potency. It is the soul's way of gathering its forces, of refusing to be defined by the shallow metrics of the world. It is the art of becoming someone, not just something. When you learn to step back with purpose, you begin to move differently through life. You no longer just exist in the room, you change the room. In the final part, we'll bring all of this together. We'll explore how being hard to get is ultimately not about being cold or distant, but about embodying self-respect and inner depth. You'll see how Jung's philosophy leads us to a kind of presence that makes people stop, look, and listen, not because of what we do, but because of who we've become. The weight of presence, why inner depth is the ultimate attraction in a world obsessed with visibility, where everyone is vying for attention. The deepest power belongs to those who no longer need it. When Carl Jung spoke of individuation, of becoming the self, he wasn't pointing us toward fame, applause, or validation. He was pointing us towards something much quieter, much heavier, presence. Not the kind of presence that demands to be noticed, but the kind that cannot be ignored. And a presence that speaks before you speak, that leaves an imprint long after you've left the room. This is the final form of being hard to get, not because you've hidden yourself, but because you've found yourself. But presence is the result of depth, and depth is earned. It cannot be faked or downloaded or performed. It comes from doing the work that most avoid the inner confrontation with your fears, your contradictions, your shadow. It comes from sacred withdrawal, from saying no when the world wants a yes, from choosing solitude over noise, meaning over popularity, integration over imitation. Jung taught that the more you align with your true self, the less you need to chase. Because the true self draws. It doesn't push, it doesn't plead, it simply is. When you embody this kind of presence, people feel it. They may not understand it, but they respond to it. You become a mirror, not of their surface, but of their depths. You become someone they can't categorize, someone who disrupts their usual patterns. And that disruption is powerful. It's what makes people think about you after they've left. It's what makes them return to your words, your silence, your energy. You didn't need to sell yourself. You didn't need to chase them. You simply were. So what does this mean for you now? It means you don't need to become louder to be heard. You don't need to be more available to be valued. You don't need to dilute yourself for the sake of fitting in. Your power is not in how much you give, but in how much of yourself you can hold. The weight of your presence isn't measured by your accessibility, it's measured by your alignment. Ask yourself, are you cultivating that weight? Are you becoming someone who pulls others into a deeper awareness just by existing? Or are you still scattering your energy in the hope of being seen? The truth is, the world doesn't need more noise, it needs more depth. More people who carry silence like a sword. More people who walk into a room not needing attention, but commanding it by the clarity of their being. Being hard to get, in Jung's world, isn't about manipulation, it's about mastery. It's about becoming someone whose value is self-evident, someone whose presence is an anchor, someone who no longer needs to chase because they've become the kind of soul that everything else naturally orbits. That isn't a tactic, that's transformation. That's the self. That's you when you stop performing and start becoming.